Hello art friends, welcome back to the art room. This week is one of my favorite lessons. I'm so excited to share this with you. In fact, I like this lesson so much that I generally do it once a year with a group of students. So I know there's some students out there that have probably done this art lesson with me one time before. If so, you're a pro at this now. I can't wait to see what you do with it this year when you get to come back and visit it. We're going to use a couple of different supplies in some new ways this time. So stick with the lesson because I think you might see something new this year. For the rest of us, we're going to be learning about the artist Jen Aranyi for the first time maybe. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the artist, but let me tell you about your supplies. This week we're going to be doing part one. We're going to be drawing. Next week we're going to be adding these beautiful colors to the background. So this week all you'll need is a paper, a pencil, and a black coloring supply. I have a pen, but you could also use your black colored pencil or your black crayon. Any of those work just fine. Go ahead and grab those supplies, but I'll give you a sneak peek at some coloring supplies for next week. Okay, we're going to get to use a little bit of everything. I'll demonstrate each of these supplies. So whatever you have works. You don't need all of them. You could use crayons, or you could use colored pencils, or you could use watercolor, or you could use chalk. This is just regular sidewalk chalk that you can use outside on your driveway. I'm going to show you some techniques with chalk next week. So just for you to have in mind next week. But for this week, grab your paper and your supplies, come back and we'll get started. Let me introduce you to artist Jen Aranyi. I first found out about her from another art teacher several years ago. I've been following her artwork ever since, and I just love it. I love the theme of nature. I love how she uses color contrasted with the black and white in her drawings. I actually have some of her artwork hanging in my art classroom, as well as some stickers on my water bottle. Yeah, I might have collected a few things. I really enjoy the way that she uses color. I love how she uses the black and white. I also love how she often works in miniature, which is really fun for us as students because it gives us a chance to try out a few things without having to fill up a whole paper. So today we're going to be working in miniature as well as she does. Quite often Miss Aranyi uses watercolor. She also has these pens that can be used like watercolor. They blend and you can add water to them. I even saw this one where she did leaf shapes with a landscape inside, which I thought was really creative. So with this in mind, let's get started by dividing our paper up into smaller shapes. I have a couple of examples of how I use different shapes here. I'm going to start out straight with a pen because I think it's going to show up better for you, but if you would like to start with a pencil, that works just fine. Let's go ahead. We're going to put 4 different shapes on our paper. Here's what I mean by that. You don't have to trace them, but if you wanted to, you could. I'm going to sketch mine out. I'm going to start with a rectangle. I'm going to do a horizontal rectangle. You should probably have at least one kind of rectangle on your paper, maybe 2. I'm going to do a horizontal one and a vertical one. If you're kind of wondering what size these are about the size of an index card or your crayon box. They don't have to be, but just if you're wondering how big mine are. I'm going to add a circle up here too. You could trace this shape if you wanted to use a cup or a small bowl, but you can also draw it out. And then I think up here, you could add a triangle. You could try that leaf shape if you really wanted to get creative. I think I'm going to try a long, thin rectangle, kind of like a bookmark. Haven't done this shape before. I think that would be kind of cool. So with me, you have at least 4 different shapes on your paper. We're going to be adding, and we're going to use these like picture frames, and we're going to add a small landscape inside each one. I would like for you to draw these landscapes along with me, but on the 4th shape, I'm going to give you free rein to draw whatever landscape you'd like to inside of it, okay? So stick with me for these first few. Let's start by air drawing what we think a mountain would look like. I want you to think about how they tend to go up at a peak, straight up and down, but they also vary. So we wouldn't do just the same size all the way across. We would have some that were tall, some that were small. Okay, I want you to do that a couple of times to kind of get a feel for how you want your mountains to go. And then I want you to also think about the fact that the main subject of our picture, what is going to take up the most space in our artwork, is actually not the mountains, it's the sky. If we look back at our artwork, we'll see that the sky covers more than half of our pictures most of the time. The same would be true of my sample here. If I went halfway down, I would just be to the top of the mountains. My sky covers more than half of my picture. So as we're drawing, we want to go down at least halfway, and we want this to be kind of the tallest mountain. So air draw a little on your paper. Think about how high you want your mountain to go. And then go ahead and add your mountain in. Mountains generally have some spaces in between them. Some peaks are closer together, some are further apart. All right, after you have your mountains in, let's talk a little bit about adding some detail. So to our mountains, we can add a shadow, which is going to add a little more three-dimension, a little more depth, and a little more texture to our mountains. Think for a moment about how shadows go. They're going to be on the opposite side that the sun is shining, right? And in this artwork, the sun is always going to be shining on the same side of the mountain, so the shadow is always going to be on the same side of the mountain. Let's see how that looks practically as we're drawing. Here's how you can draw in these shadows. Start at the peak, and I like to do kind of a wavy line down, and then connect it to the left side of your mountain. So I've almost made a right triangle on my mountain. I'm going to use these straight lines kind of close together to form the shadow. Instantly, already I see that third dimension and that texture added to my picture. We're going to do the same for each of our peaks. So we're going to start in the middle, wavy line down, and connect it over to the left side, and then add these lines. As long as we keep our shadow on the same side of every peak, it will look realistic. Well, at least more realistic, right? You can decide how deep your shadows are going to go by how far you carry your line down the mountain. The small one, I might not go down quite as far as I do on this large one. All right, so we've added in the shadows to our mountains. Okay, let's add some trees to the front. Oftentimes we have evergreens in Miss Arany's work. Evergreens are generally cone-shaped. That means that they're smaller at the top and they get larger as we go further down. There's a few different ways you could draw trees. I'll illustrate a few down here at the bottom on my scrap paper. I generally like to start with a straight line that decides how tall my tree is going to be, and then you could add straight lines out to the sides. I like to use diagonal, like where the branches are kind of going down towards the ground, but you could do them more out straight. Okay, there's one way to do a tree, or straight line. And I like to do this kind of wavy line. I'm not picking up my pencil. I'm doing this curve out to the side, and then I'm bringing it back into the trunk of the tree. Adds a little more texture and fluff. It's a different line than I used on the mountains too, and I think that's why I kind of favored this one, but either one works. All right, so let's add a few trees to the front of our artwork. We're going to start by deciding how tall you want your tree, and just draw a straight line. Starting at the top, I'm going to add my branches. They're going to get wider or longer as they go towards the bottom. And I'll do the same on both sides. Quite often I like to work in odds, and I know we've talked about this in art before, but odd numbers are interesting to our brains. So when you use odd numbers in your artwork, you have a good chance of grabbing the viewer's attention. So here's 2 trees. I can add a third to create an odd grouping. Or I could add 5 total. That would also be an odd number. If you're just feeling really creative today, go for it. Add 7 to the front. All right, there's my first landscape. All right, let's go on. So if you're working in pencil right now, you want to grab your black crayon or your black colored pencil, and you want to go back over your lines. So you'll go over your mountains, you'll go over the lines that you added for your shadow, and you'll go over the lines where you added your trees. And then you would go back and take your eraser, and you could erase all of your pencil lines from there. I'm going to add just trees to this one. So when I come back in with the sky, this one's going to be very colorful. I'm going to add a tall tree right in the center. And because the tree is kind of more of a focus in this picture than the mountains, I'm going to add more texture to the branches because that's going to stand out the most. So when I come back and add color, this is going to be kind of silhouetted against the backdrop. I'm going to keep with my number 3, my odd number for interest, but you don't have to. You could definitely leave 2 trees here. It has its own appeal, doesn't it? I also like to vary the size of my trees. So some are taller, some are shorter. All right, so I have 2 landscapes going. We're just breezing right through these. All right, I'm going to challenge us to do something a little more complicated on this one, but don't worry, it's not going to be hard, I promise. All right, so I'm going to add mountains again. I'm going to go down a little more than halfway. You guys are pros at mountains now. Add a small mountain range in the back. Let's add our shadow to the left side of each mountain. You could add your shadow to the right side if you wanted to. I know there's somebody out there asking that question. Yes, you could, just as long as your shadow is always on the same side in that picture. You could add it either direction. All right, instead of adding trees first, I'm going to add kind of a landscape to this. So here's what I mean by that. I'm going to add this base of the mountains, and then maybe this is a snowbank or a road that comes down through the mountains. It curves around and it gets closer to me as it comes down. The reason I'm going to do this is I want to add trees that are further away and closer. Here's what I mean by that. A tree that's further away is going to appear smaller. So back here, a tree might be about this size. We know that it's not really tiny like it looks like on our artwork, but it's further away, so it's going to appear smaller. If I come into the middle of this line, my tree is going to be larger because it's gotten closer to me. Things that are further away appear smaller, and things that are closer to us appear taller and larger. All right, if I'm going to add a tree all the way up here, it's going to be my tallest of all trees. So I drew a small trunk, a medium-sized trunk. The closest to me would be large. Its branches will probably go out further as well. It's even going to overlap this one. So we've added depth to our mountains by adding these shadows, but we've also added depth to our landscape by varying the tree sizes. They're small, medium, and large as it comes up closer. All right, I'm going to add a few more trees. I'm going to add another small one back here in the backdrop. And I think I'll add a small one besides this one. All right, so here we are. We've drawn 3 landscapes. We've talked a little bit about how to add the shadow and interest to the sides of our mountains, that it will always be on the same side of the peak. We've talked about how adding an odd number is very interesting to the eye. And we've talked about how to add depth to our pictures. We can have trees in the back that are small, but as they get closer to us, they will appear larger. So now you have your final shape. Depending on what shape you have, mine is a very small bookmark shape. I want you to go ahead and add a landscape to it. Go ahead and stay with the same theme of mountains and trees if you would like. If you would like to add some rolling hills in here and maybe an oak tree in the back, you can totally do a nod towards more of a landscape that we would have here. Here's a couple of examples of pictures that I've had over the years as samples. Definitely look back at Miss Aranyi's work as well and choose something for your final square. All right, that's it for this week. Put this somewhere safe. Put it in your art portfolio. Put it with your schoolwork so that next week when we come back, you'll be ready to add color to it. All right, I've enjoyed drawing with you today. Thank you for hanging with me, and I'll see you again next week.